In the spring of 2013, a commemoration event was held in Williams Lake, BC to honor those who attended the St. Joseph Mission Residential School.
Orange Shirt Day is inspired by the experience and story of Phyllis Jack Webstad, whose shiny new orange shirt was taken away on her first day of school at the mission.
Both her story and Orange Shirt Day have become an annual opportunity for awareness.
An opportunity to uphold and inspire the discussion of all aspects of residential schools.
On September 30th, we commemorate Orange Shirt Day because it was during this time of the year that Indigenous students were taken away from their homes to attend residential schools Canada-wide.
This day, September 30th, is a day that gives educators the opportunity to set the stage for planning and programming around equity and inclusivity, anti-racism, and anti-bullying for the coming school year.
It is a day that provides students with that spark of awareness, that opportunity to ignite their plan of action.
Through inspiring awareness, we're inspiring a better future with new perspectives together in unity.
Let's begin with an introduction to residential schools. Here is Residential Schools in Canada, a timeline.
For more than 200 years, religious orders run mission schools for Indigenous children, the precursors to the Government of Canada's residential school system. The Mohawk Institute becomes a boarding school. Run by the Anglican Church, it is the first government-funded residential school in Canada. A government report recommends Indigenous children be separated from their parents in order to assimilate them into Western culture. These recommendations influence federal laws and policies designed to strip Indigenous people of their culture and rights. Isle Cross opens in northern Saskatchewan. The majority of students are Métis. The government takes authority over Indigenous people and education for First Nations. The Indian Act gives the Canadian government control over Indigenous rights and culture. The Act includes only First Nations as status Indians. It excludes Métis and Inuit. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald authorizes the creation of the residential school system, which is designed to isolate Indigenous children from their families and cut all ties to their cultures. The number of schools across Canada quickly climbs to over 40. The Government of Canada requires First Nations children aged 7 to 16 to attend residential school. Dr. Peter Henderson Bryce exposes the government's neglect of Indigenous children's health, including alarmingly high death rates of residential school students. More than 80 institutions are in operation across Canada, the most at any one time. 4 students are investigated for arson. Others reportedly cheer as they watch the school burn. This is one of dozens of fires set by students across Canada as a form of resistance. Inuit children are officially included in the residential school system. 6 schools open in the Western Arctic as the government takes over the administration of many church-run residential schools. Grolier Hall and Stringer Hall open in Inuvik, housing 500 students. More than 20,000 Indigenous children are taken from their families by government social workers and placed in foster care or adoption homes, often with non-Indigenous families. Adoptees lose connection with their Indigenous language, culture, and identity. 12-year-old Chani Wenjak dies after escaping from the Cecilia Jeffrey Residential School. A formal investigation follows. The all-white jury finds that residential schools cause tremendous emotional and psychological problems. The Canadian government takes over responsibility for the remaining schools from the churches. Thousands of Indigenous students are enrolled at the 28 residential schools that are still running in Canada. Phil Fontaine, head of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, speaks publicly of the abuse he suffered at Fort Alexander Indian Residential School. He calls for a public inquiry, which the federal government initiates in 1991. Gordon's Residential School is the last federally run school to close. The report recommends a public inquiry into the effects of residential schools, including language loss and trauma. The government provides compensation to survivors, including the Common Experience Payment and a focus on funding and supporting Indigenous health and healing services. The agreement establishes funds for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC. Prime Minister Stephen Harper apologizes to former students, their families, and communities for Canada's role in the operation of residential schools. Provincial and territorial apologies follow in the years ahead. After hosting events across Canada, the TRC releases a summary of its findings. It includes 94 calls to action aimed at redressing the legacy of residential schools and assisting in the process of Canadian reconciliation. The News Centre holds a permanent archive of materials and testimonies on residential schools gathered during the TRC. The TRC characterizes Canada's treatment of Indigenous people as cultural genocide. Thousands of children died due to Canada's residential school system. More than 80,000 survivors and their families still live with its legacy.
Many people have said over the years, why can't you just get over it and move on? And my answer has always been, why can't you always remember this? And until people show that they have learned from this, we will never forget.
Next is the story of Cheney Charlie Wenjack, whose death sparked the first inquest into the treatment of Indigenous children in Canadian residential schools.
Johnny wanted to go back home. It was 1,000 kilometers away. They forced him to go to the Indian residential school. More than 150,000 of us children had to go. They wanted to change us.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name.
Hallowed be your name.
Thy kingdom come,
Thy kingdom come,
thy will be done.
Thy will be done.
Kill the Indian and the child. It's been called cultural genocide. I survived residential school. My brother Johnny did not.
Chani Wenjack was one of thousands of children who died due to Canada's residential school system. More than 80,000 survivors and their families still live with its legacy today.
And now, the story of a residential school survivor. Here is Louise Longclaws.
I guess it's just that family connection and just not having some kind of memory at times. And it always goes back to being robotic. No feeling, no emotions, no nothing. If you got hurt, no one was there to comfort you. You know, things like just things that as a child I should have gotten from a loving parent, you know, or an adult who looked after me. I wasn't able to parent my children as well as I wish I could have. No one ever read to me. You know, no one ever came and cuddled me or, you know, gave me a hug if I was feeling sad or upset or I'd fallen down and no one was there for me. I had to just basically pick myself up and keep going. I'd like to think I'm getting better at it with my grandchildren.
Did your parents go to residential schools?
Yes, they did. She just told me that she had actually gotten punched in the face for speaking her language, and she flew across the room, she said, and landed against a rad, and her tooth protruded through her upper lip, so she had a scar on her lip. She also told us that she did not teach us her language, which was Ojibwe, because she didn't want us to experience what she went through. It was her way of protecting us. My dad, he just kind of said, you know what, he says, with you, he says, we were like little robots. We were like little soldiers, he says. We used to parade around like soldiers, he said. And we were so hungry. And that's where he learned how to eat raw potatoes. I used to wonder why he used to eat raw potatoes, but they were hungry. So they would eat raw potatoes, and then they'd take some of the potatoes and at night and they'd exchange for bread with other students. If I was to give advice, I would suggest that people start to listen, to allow us to talk and to be heard and to listen. That's such an integral piece of this whole process, is listening and actually believing us. You know, because at the beginning, people said that we all colluded across Canada to make this story up. And I was like, how could we possibly have ever done that? We couldn't. So it's that belief that things really did happen to us. And it's affected us in many ways personally, you know, in our everyday life, our relationships with people and our family. And it's because of that relationship being affected, we can't be who we should be as healthy individuals, as parents, you know, community members, cousins, relatives, any kind of relations that we have. I think that's very important, and that we all sit together. It's nice when we can sit together too and talk, you know, like how can we move forward? Let's move together. Let's move forward together.